Rebecca Williams stared at the stack of unpaid bills scattered across her kitchen table, each envelope a reminder of how far she'd fallen. At 42, she should have been established, secure, building toward retirement. Instead, she was counting quarters for Sophie's school lunch money while her ex-husband Robert lived in his new downtown condo with his 28-year-old secretary. The fluorescent light above buzzed like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across Rebecca's face as she calculated and recalculated. 3 jobs, 60-hour weeks, and still the math never worked. "Mama," 9-year-old Sophie appeared in the doorway, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. Dark circles under her young eyes spoke of too many nights spent worrying about things children shouldn't understand. "Are we going to lose the apartment?" The question hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She'd tried so hard to shield Sophie from their reality, but children see everything. "We're just going through a tough time, sweetheart. Mama's figuring it out." Sophie nodded with the solemn acceptance of a child who'd learned not to ask for things. She'd stopped mentioning birthday parties she wasn't invited to, stopped talking about field trips that cost money they didn't have. At 9 years old, she was already carrying the weight of adult worries. Rebecca's phone buzzed. Another text from Robert's lawyer about missed support payments. She deleted it without reading, adding it to the pile of problems she'd deal with tomorrow. Always tomorrow. The knock came at 2 in the morning. Rebecca jerked awake on the couch, neck stiff from falling asleep over her laptop where she'd been doing data entry for $3 an hour. The knock came again, measured and professional. Not the desperate pounding of an emergency, but not casual either. Through the peephole, she saw an elderly woman in an expensive coat holding a leather briefcase. Rebecca opened the door with the chain still attached. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Margaret Foster, attorney with Blackwood, Foster and Associates. I apologize for the late hour, but I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your phone seems to be disconnected." Rebecca's stomach dropped. Lawyers at midnight meant only bad news. "What's this about?" "May I come in? It's regarding an inheritance." The words seemed to hang in the air like a promise. Rebecca unhooked the chain and stepped aside. Margaret Foster settled into Rebecca's threadbare armchair with the grace of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "6 months ago, your great-uncle Edward Blackwood passed away in Redwood County, California. According to our research, you are his sole surviving heir." Rebecca shook her head. "There must be a mistake. I don't have any family in California. My mother never mentioned an Edward Blackwood." "That's not uncommon in this case," Margaret said gently. "Edward was quite reclusive. He lived alone on a 58-acre property for nearly 50 years. Your mother was his sister's daughter, but they lost contact decades ago. But his will is very specific. You are inheriting the Blackwood estate, including the land and a structure known locally as the Cathedral Sequoia." She handed Rebecca a photograph. The tree was magnificent beyond imagination, its trunk impossibly massive, weathered bark the color of rust and cinnamon. Near its base, Rebecca could see an opening, a natural hollow carved by centuries of time and fire. "The property is valued at approximately $90,000, Margaret continued. "It's remote, with limited access, but it's yours free and clear. No mortgages, no liens." $90,000. Rebecca's hands trembled as she held the photograph. It was more money than she'd seen in her entire life. "There's also this," Margaret said, producing an envelope sealed with red wax. "Edward left specific instructions that you were to receive this personally." Rebecca broke the seal with shaking fingers. And inside was a single sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting. "To my dear grandniece Rebecca, we've never met, but I've watched your struggle from afar. The land I'm leaving you holds more than trees and soil. Beneath the cathedral lies the truth I've guarded for 50 years. Look for the guardian's mark, and remember, some treasures exact a price, but others offer redemption. Choose wisely. Uncle Edward. 3 days later, Rebecca's ancient Honda Civic wheezed its way up Highway 101, loaded with everything she and Sophie owned that mattered. The rest of their belongings had been left behind in their studio apartment, along with the notice from their landlord and the pink slip from Rebecca's night job. "How much longer, Mama?" Sophie pressed her face against the window, watching the redwoods grow taller with each passing mile. "Maybe an hour," Rebecca said, consulting the hand-drawn map Margaret had provided. GPS had stopped working 20 miles back when cell service disappeared. The dirt road that led to their property was barely more than 2 tire tracks winding through towering trees. When they finally emerged into a clearing, both Rebecca and Sophie fell silent. The cathedral sequoia stood before them like something from a fairy tale. The trunk was easily 30 feet across, rising so high that Rebecca had to lean forward and look up through the windshield to see where it disappeared into the canopy far above. Near its base was the hollow, large enough to drive a car through, dark and inviting and somehow sacred. Near the tree stood a small cabin, weathered but sturdy, with solar panels on the roof and a stone chimney. "Mama," Sophie breathed, stepping out of the car. "It's like a castle from a storybook." They approached the massive trunk together. The hollow was spacious enough for several people to stand comfortably. The walls inside were charred black from some ancient fire, scarred but alive. "Look, Mama," Sophie said, pointing to the back wall of the hollow. "There's something carved here." Rebecca moved closer, running her fingers over deeply carved letters. "E.B. Guardian, 1972. Uncle Edward's initials." "Guardian of what?" A sound outside made Rebecca freeze. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate. She grabbed Sophie's hand and stepped out to find an elderly man standing by their car. He was weathered as old leather, with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes. He carried a walking stick and wore clothes that suggested he was more comfortable in the forest than in town. "Help you folks?" he asked, his voice gravelly but not unfriendly. Rebecca straightened, positioning herself between the stranger and Sophie. "This is my property. I'm Rebecca Williams. I inherited it from Edward Blackwood." The man's weathered face shifted, relief crossing his features. "Walt Murphy had property about 3 miles west, been neighbors with Edward for 40 years. He studied Rebecca's face. "You got his eyes. Same stubborn set to the jaw, too. You knew him well." "Well, as Edward let anyone know him," Walt replied. "He was a good man carrying a heavy burden. Spent 50 years making sure nobody bothered this place, especially that tree." His gaze moved to Sophie, then back to Rebecca. "You planning to stay?" "I don't know yet. We're just starting to figure things out." Walt nodded slowly. "Well, you should know there's folks in town been wondering what would happen to this place now Edward's gone. Morrison Timber Company's been trying to buy this land for decades, and there's others too. People who think Edward might have had something out here worth more than trees." A chill ran down Rebecca's spine. "Are you warning me about something?" "Just letting you know how things stand," Walt replied. "Edward kept people away from this property for 5 decades. Now he's gone, and you're here, and folks might think you'll be easier to deal with than he was." Before Rebecca could respond, Walt touched the brim of his hat. "Word of advice, check the cabin before dark. And whatever you do, don't go exploring that tree alone until you understand what you might find." The cabin was Spartanly furnished but clean. One large room served as kitchen, living area, and bedroom, with a tiny bathroom attached. Shelves lined the walls filled with books about botany, geology, and local history. Rebecca found evidence of Edward's simple life everywhere, but it was the locked chest under the bed that caught her attention. As darkness settled over the forest, Rebecca waited until Sophie was asleep, then returned to the hollow with a flashlight and the small brass key she'd found in Edward's desk. Inside the chest, she found journals dating back 50 years, newspaper clippings yellow with age, and a letter addressed to her in Edward's careful handwriting. Rebecca, if you're reading this, then you've found your way to the cathedral. I've spent half a century guarding secrets here, and now that burden passes to you. In 1972, my brother Thomas and I made a terrible mistake. We stole gold bullion from an armored car in San Francisco. Thomas died in the attempt, and I fled here with the gold and a lifetime of guilt. I've hidden that gold beneath this tree for 50 years, afraid to use it, afraid to return it, afraid of the people who might come looking for it. But there's more to this story than my shame. The land you've inherited holds deeper secrets than my crime. Look for the guardian's mark in the tree, but be warned, this fortune comes with a price. There are people who will try to take it from you, people who believe they have more right to it than you do. Trust Walt Murphy, and remember, sometimes the greatest treasures are the lives we can change, not the gold we can claim. Your Uncle Edward. Rebecca's hands shook as she folded the letter. She looked around the hollow with new eyes, searching for any sign of a hiding place. It took her nearly an hour to find it. The floor near the back wall wasn't quite level, and when she examined it closely with her flashlight, she could see the outline of a trap door, fitted so perfectly it was nearly invisible. When she found the iron rod hanging from a knot in the wood and used it to pry, the section lifted with a grinding sound. Stone steps led down into darkness. Rebecca descended carefully, her flashlight beam dancing ahead of her. 12 steps brought her to the bottom, where the passage opened into a chamber carved from the earth itself, roughly circular, following the natural spread of the tree's root system. And there, stacked against the curved earthen wall, was more gold than she had ever imagined. Bar after bar of precious metal, each stamped with official markings. Credit Suisse, 1 kilo, fine gold, 999.9. She counted quickly, nearly 400 gold bars. At current prices, she was looking at a fortune beyond comprehension. Rebecca sank to her knees on the packed earth floor, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she discovered. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was life-changing wealth that could secure Sophie's future forever. But it was also stolen goods, the fruit of a crime that had cost her Uncle Thomas his life and Edward his freedom. She was so absorbed in the discovery that she almost missed the sound from above. Footsteps in the hollow, moving slowly and deliberately around the interior of the tree. Rebecca's blood turned to ice. Someone was up there, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. She grabbed her flashlight and climbed the stairs as quietly as she could. Through the gap of the partially open trap door, she could see beams of light moving around the interior of the tree. Multiple flashlights, multiple people. "Check the walls again," a voice said. Edward was clever, but he couldn't have hidden access to a chamber this size without leaving some trace. "Maybe the girl already found it," another voice replied. "Car's been here 3 days. That's plenty of time." The decision was made for her when the trap door suddenly slammed shut above her head, plunging her into absolute darkness. "Found it!" someone called out. "Heavy stone slab, perfectly fitted. She's down there." Panic flooded through Rebecca. She was trapped in an underground chamber with stolen gold, and the people above knew exactly where she was. She felt along the stone steps until she reached the trap door and pushed upward with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. Something heavy was holding it down. "Mrs. Williams," a voice called from above, muffled but clear. "My name is Harrison Cole. I represent Morrison Timber Company. I think we need to have a conversation about what you found." Rebecca found her voice. "Let me out of here. My daughter's in the cabin. If you hurt her—" "Your daughter is perfectly safe," Cole interrupted. "My men are watching the cabin to make sure she doesn't wake up and wander into danger. Now about that gold, it doesn't belong to you. It was left to me by my uncle." "Your uncle was a thief," Cole said coldly. "But that's not the gold I'm interested in. Tell me, Mrs. Williams, Have you explored that chamber thoroughly? Because I think you'll find there's more down there than your uncle's stolen treasure." Rebecca's heart stopped. What was he talking about? "You see," Cole continued, "this land was part of my great-great-grandfather's timber empire. When Cornelius Morrison died in 1929, his personal fortune disappeared. Millions of dollars in gold that was never found. Family legend says he buried it somewhere on his original holdings. This property, Mrs. Williams, was the crown jewel of the Morrison Empire." The implications hit Rebecca like a sledgehammer. If Cole was right, if there was a second treasure hidden beneath the tree— "I'm going to move this stone now," Cole said, "and you're going to show me everything you found." The weight lifted from the trap door and it swung open. Rebecca climbed out slowly, blinking in the harsh glare of multiple flashlights. 5 men stood around the hollow, all wearing black clothing and carrying equipment. Harrison Cole was younger than she'd expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He wore expensive clothes that looked out of place in the forest. "Show me," he said simply. Rebecca had no choice. With Cole's men flanking her, she led them down into the chamber. But as they reached the bottom and their lights illuminated the space, she realized something that made her blood run cold. There was twice as much gold as she'd seen before. While she'd been examining the marked bars from Edward's theft, she'd missed the far side of the chamber. There, stacked in neat rows, were hundreds more gold bars, but these were different, older, unmarked, corroded at the edges as if they'd been buried far longer than 50 years. "My God," Cole breathed, his flashlight playing across the ancient treasure. He actually found it. Grandfather's stories were true. Rebecca stared in shock at the dual fortune. Edward hadn't just hidden his stolen gold beneath a tree. He'd discovered Cornelius Morrison's buried treasure and kept both secrets for 50 years. "This changes everything," Cole said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "The Morrison gold belongs to my family by right, but you've complicated things by finding it first." "Even if that's Morrison's gold," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady, "it was buried on property my family legally owns." Cole laughed coldly. "Discovery rights don't apply to family heirlooms, Mrs. Williams. That gold was stolen from my family. I'm taking it back." One of his men stepped forward with canvas bags, but that's when they heard it, a sound that filled Rebecca with both terror and hope. Sophie calling her name from somewhere above. "Mama! Mama, where are you?" Cole's expression hardened. "She wasn't supposed to wake up." "Let me go to her," Rebecca pleaded. "She's just a child. She's scared." "Actually," Cole said thoughtfully, "maybe we should bring her down here. Make sure she understands the importance of keeping family secrets." The threat was clear. Rebecca felt something snap inside her, the same protective fury that had carried her through 4 years of fighting for Sophie's survival. "Don't you dare touch my daughter." Cole smiled without warmth. "Then cooperate. Help us load the Morrison gold, and I'll let you keep whatever Edward stole." "Mama!" Sophie's voice was closer now, echoing down through the trap door. "Up here, baby," Rebecca called back. "Stay back from the tree." But it was too late. Sophie's small face appeared at the opening above, backlit by moonlight. "Mama, there are men outside. I was scared." Cole gestured to one of his men, who started up the stairs. "Bring her down." Rebecca moved without thinking, grabbing the iron rod she'd used to open the trap door and swinging it hard at the man's knee. He went down with a scream, tumbling back into the chamber and knocking over one of their oil lamps. Burning fuel spilled across the earthen floor as Rebecca fought like a cornered animal in the cramped space. Cole's men struggled to grab her while avoiding the spreading flames, but the chamber was too small and crowded for them to use their numbers effectively. "Get out!" Cole shouted as smoke began to fill the space. "Everyone out!" They scrambled up the stairs as flames began to spread below. Rebecca emerged last, her clothes singed, her hands burned from grabbing the hot iron rod. Cole and his men were in disarray, torn between pursuit and damage control. "Put it out!" Cole screamed at his men. "All that gold!" "The whole tree could go up," one of them replied. "Ancient wood like this, it'll burn for days." That's when the sound of engines filled the clearing. Not one or two vehicles, but many coming fast up the access road with headlights blazing through the trees. Cole spun toward the sound, his face twisting with rage and fear, as Walt Murphy emerged from the forest behind the cabin. But Walt wasn't alone. Dr. Sarah Kim from the town clinic stepped out from behind a massive redwood, holding an old hunting rifle with surprising competence. Pastor Michael from the local church appeared with a shotgun. Eleanor Santos, the town librarian, carried what looked like a military-issue rifle. Young Danny from the general store, elderly Pete, who ran the hardware shop, even Mrs. Patterson from the post office. All armed, all positioned strategically around the clearing like they'd been planning this for years. "Evening, Harrison," Walt said calmly, his own rifle trained on Cole. "Figured you'd show up eventually. 40 years your family's been sniffing around this property." The vehicles that had been approaching, 3 pickup trucks and an old SUV, pulled into the clearing with their headlights creating a wall of blazing light. More locals emerged, including Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez and Fire Chief Martinez, all carrying weapons and moving with military precision. Cole looked around the circle of armed townspeople, and his confidence cracked like thin ice. "You don't know what you're interfering with. There's stolen gold here. Millions of dollars. Belongs to Rebecca," Eleanor Santos interrupted firmly, her rifle never wavering. "Whatever Edward left her, whatever she found on her own property, it belongs to her. You want to dispute that? You do it in court." "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Cole snarled, but his voice had lost its authority. "Morrison Timber has resources, lawyers, connections, and we have something you don't," Walt said quietly, his finger moving to his trigger. "We have each other. We take care of our own in Millfield. Rebecca's one of us now." Cole's men were shifting nervously, clearly outnumbered and outgunned by locals who knew every inch of this terrain. The air crackled with tension as weapons stayed trained on targets, fingers ready on triggers. "You're making a mistake that will destroy all of you," Cole tried one last time, but his voice cracked with fear. "Maybe so," Walt replied, "but you'll be dead long before any lawyers get here. Your choice, Harrison. Walk away now, or we start shooting and let the county sort out the bodies." The standoff stretched taut for 30 seconds that felt like an hour. Rebecca could see Cole calculating odds, weighing his options, looking at faces that showed they weren't bluffing. Finally, slowly, Cole stepped back, his hands rising slightly. "This isn't over. Morrison Timber will be back with federal marshals, with court orders." "Looking forward to it," Eleanor called out sweetly, though her rifle remained steady. "I've got 40 years of research on your family's business practices. I'm sure the newspapers will find it fascinating reading." Cole and his men retreated to their vehicles, but not before Cole turned back one more time, his face twisted with rage. "Enjoy your treasure while you can, Mrs. Williams. By the time my lawyers are done with you, you'll wish you'd never heard the name Blackwood." Only after their convoy disappeared into the darkness did Rebecca allow herself to sink to her knees, the adrenaline leaving her body in a rush. Sophie ran to her from Walt's truck where she'd been safely hidden, throwing her arms around her mother. "It's okay," Rebecca whispered into Sophie's hair. "We're okay." The legal battle that followed was every bit as vicious as Cole had promised. Morrison Timber filed suit claiming ownership of any treasure found on the property, bringing historians, genealogists, and expert witnesses to support their case. The story made national news. Single mother versus corporate dynasty in fight over buried fortune. But Eleanor Santos and David Chen, the civil rights attorney Rebecca had hired from San Francisco, had been preparing for this fight longer than anyone realized. Eleanor's decades of research into Morrison family history proved invaluable, while David's experience fighting corporate intimidation gave them the legal firepower they needed. They presented evidence that Cornelius Morrison's alleged buried treasure was largely family myth. Financial records from 1929 showed that Morrison had lost almost everything in the stock market crash, dying heavily in debt rather than with a hidden fortune. More importantly, they had Edward's detailed journals, which Rebecca read portions of in court. Found them by accident in 1975 while expanding the hiding place for what Thomas and I had stolen. Ancient wooden chests, rotted through, filled with gold bars so old they were green with corrosion. Had to be Morrison's treasure. The timing was right, and the location matched the stories. But I never touched a single bar. Seemed wrong somehow, adding theft to theft. So I left them where they were and built around them. Edward had kept meticulous records, documenting serial numbers from the 1972 heist, photographing the unmarked bars he discovered, treating himself as a custodian rather than an owner. But perhaps most damning to Morrison Timber's case was Eleanor's research into the land purchase. She'd found the original 1931 deed, which clearly stated that the Blackwood family had purchased the property with all mineral rights, water rights, and any artifacts or treasures contained thereon. The judge's ruling came on a gray February morning. Rebecca sat in the courtroom with Sophie beside her, Walt and Eleanor behind them, and half the town of Millfield filling the gallery. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, Judge Patricia Hernandez said, "This court finds that Morrison Timber Company has failed to establish clear legal ownership of any treasure discovered on the Blackwood property. The evidence shows that any theoretical Morrison treasure would have been legally transferred with the land sale in 1931. She paused, looking directly at Rebecca. However, regarding the gold bars traceable to the 1972 robbery, this court recognizes the complexity of the situation. Therefore, this court awards full ownership of all unmarked gold found on the property to Mrs. Rebecca Williams. Regarding the marked gold, this court orders that Mrs. Williams work with federal authorities to resolve its status, with the understanding that she may be entitled to a substantial finder's fee." The gavel came down. Rebecca had won. In the months that followed, Rebecca made decisions that surprised everyone. Working with federal authorities, she negotiated a settlement regarding the gold from the 1972 heist, receiving a 15% finder's fee, over $4 million. The Morrison gold, legally and unquestionably hers, totaled $26 million, $30 million, generational wealth, freedom beyond her wildest dreams. But Rebecca had learned something from Edward's 50 years of guilt and isolation. Money hoarded was a curse. Money shared was a blessing. She established the Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to revitalizing rural communities. She funded scholarships, ensuring that lack of money would never keep young people from pursuing their dreams. She opened Millfield's first free health clinic and bought the abandoned lumber mill, converting it into a community center. The transformation was remarkable. Young families moved to Millfield, drawn by the opportunities Rebecca was creating. Main Street filled with new businesses. The elementary school expanded to accommodate growing enrollment. Sophie thrived in this environment. The shy, worried child became confident and outgoing, joining the school choir and making friends easily. Most importantly, she never again had to worry about money for basic necessities. But perhaps the most significant change was in Rebecca herself. The desperate, exhausted woman who had arrived at the Cathedral Sequoia was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, more purposeful. One evening in late summer, as Rebecca sat on her expanded porch watching Sophie play with friends, She reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The cathedral sequoia stood silent and majestic, its hollow no longer hiding treasure, but sheltering something far more precious. A community built on trust and generosity. Sophie ran over, breathless and glowing with happiness. "Mama, can we have my birthday party here? Under the tree?" Rebecca pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair in the clean mountain air. "Of course, sweetheart. This is our home now." "Are we rich?" Sophie asked with the directness of a child. "We're blessed," Rebecca replied. "We have each other. We have this beautiful place, and we have friends who care about us. That's the richest anyone can be." As stars began to appear through the canopy, Rebecca thought about Edward's letter. He'd been right about treasures exacting a price. The gold had cost him 50 years of isolation and fear, but he'd also been right about redemption. Rebecca Williams had inherited a hollow tree and found $30 million in gold. But what she had really discovered was the strength to become exactly who she was meant to be. The cathedral sequoia had kept its secrets for 1,000 years. Now it stood guard over something infinitely more valuable, a family that had found home and a community that had found hope. Some inheritances are meant to be passed forward, and the greatest treasure of all is love that multiplies when shared.